Imagine you're looking at a brain scan, right?
Okay.
And the fMRI is just lit up, like brilliant, fiery clusters of activity right in the center of the neural real estate.
Right. The reward centers.
Exactly. So looking at that scan, the immediate clinical assumption is pretty obvious. Like you'd think this person just took a massive intoxicating dose of a hard drug, something like cocaine or heroin.
Oh, absolutely. It looks exactly like that.
But here's the hook for you today. You might actually be looking at the brain of someone who has just fallen head over heels in love.
Yeah.
Under a brain scanner, a person newly in love and a person addicted to narcotics, they look almost identical.
It's really a stunning visual overlap. But, I mean, it makes perfect sense when you actually look at the architecture.
Right.
Because the brain simply does not distinguish between the internal chemical rush of a new romance and the external chemical rush of a narcotic.
Wow.
Yeah, the neural pathways mediating both of those experiences are one and the same.
And that overlap is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We're taking this massive stack of sources, everything from, anthropological research on romance and these dense neurobiology textbooks, all the way over to clinical addiction studies.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is, yeah. But we're synthesizing it all for you. We are mapping out how the exact same neural pathways govern our greatest joys, like finding a partner and our darkest compulsions.
Right.
We'll look at how chronic stress physically hijacks this delicate system, and most importantly, how modern brain science gives us the tools to, well, regain control.
Which is so crucial today.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. We need to look at where this intense fiery reaction actually begins in the brain's geography. Where does this start?
So it begins in the mesolimbic dopaminergic pathway,
Okay.
which is this evolutionarily ancient circuit. It originates deep down in the midbrain, specifically a region called the ventral tegmental area.
The VTA, right.
Exactly, the VTA. And it projects outward to the nucleus accumbens, which essentially operates as the brain's primary reward center.
Got it.
And historically, I mean, you have to remember, this system didn't evolve for romantic poetry or recreational drugs.
Right, nature doesn't care about that.
Exactly. It evolved purely to keep us alive. It rewards finding food, securing shelter, reproducing. When a behavior promotes survival, this pathway just floods the system with dopamine.
Signaling the brain to remember that behavior.
Right, and to repeat it at all costs.
Okay, so the sources highlight Dr. Helen Fisher's anthropological research here, which I found fascinating. She breaks romantic love down into 3 distinct neurobiological stages.
Yeah, lust, attraction, and attachment.
Right, and lust is basically driven by baseline sex hormones. But that second stage attraction, or limerence, as it's called, that is where the mesolimbic pathway just shifts into a completely different gear.
It really does. During limerence, the nucleus accumbens is basically submerged in a highly specific neurochemical cocktail.
I love cocktail.
Yeah, exactly. Dopamine levels just skyrocket, which produces that intense, euphoric, almost obsessive focus on the new partner.
You literally can't stop thinking about them.
Exactly. And simultaneously, there's a massive surge of norepinephrine, which drives up all that physiological arousal. And then there's this fascinating compound called phenylethylamine, or PEA.
Right, and PEA, it essentially acts as a natural amphetamine, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does.
Which completely explains the physical symptoms we all associate with new love, like the sweaty palms, the racing heart, that intense vibrating nervous energy where you forget to eat and you can't fall asleep.
Yeah, you are functionally on a potent endogenous upper.
But, reading through the clinical data on PEA and these dopamine spikes, it actually led me to a fairly dark hypothesis.
Oh.
Yeah, because if the attraction phase of love is functionally an amphetamine high, well, shouldn't the brain respond the way it does to any drug? Meaning, by building tolerance and, punishing the user with actual withdrawal if the supply is cut off, if love is literally a drug, does it create actual withdrawal?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the clinical fMRI data on rejected lovers completely confirms that hypothesis.
Really?
Yeah, researchers actually took subjects who had recently been dumped but reported still being desperately in love, and they put them in the scanner.
Ouch. That sounds like a rough study to participate in.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is that the activity in their nucleus accumbens and VTA perfectly mirrored the severe withdrawal state of substance abusers.
Wow. Perfectly mirrored.
Yes. When the relationship abruptly ends, the brain suffers this catastrophic drop in dopamine and serotonin, right alongside a massive, overwhelming surge in stress hormones, like cortisol.
So the brain is thrown into a literal chemical withdrawal.
Completely.
So that obsessive, agonizing urge to like text an ex in the middle of the night.
Right.
That isn't just a lack of willpower or being needy. It's the brain desperately begging for a chemical fix to stop the physical pain of withdrawal.
Exactly. It is a survival circuit, screaming that it has lost a vital resource. I mean, the distress is emotional, sure, but it's deeply physical because the mesolimbic pathway is treating the loss of that partner with the exact same urgency as starvation.
That is wild. And, if the withdrawal is that devastating, the initial high must be incredibly blinding.
Oh, it has to be.
And the sources show that the brain actually suppresses its own higher functions to maintain that high. Like during the attraction phase, the fMRI scans show that activity in the prefrontal cortex, the logic center, is heavily
That is
suppressed.
significantly dialed down.
And at the same time, the amygdala goes completely quiet. So it's like turning off a computer's antivirus software so a new, potentially risky program can just install itself without triggering any firewalls.
That's a great analogy. And the suppression of those specific regions, it's highly calculated by evolution.
Why, though? Why would evolution intentionally make us dumb and fearless?
Well, think about it. If our critical thinking and threat detection centers remained fully online when we met a potential mate, the cognitive friction would just be way too high.
We'd overthink it.
Exactly. We would hyperfixate on their flaws, we'd remain too guarded, too suspicious, and too analytical to ever let someone close enough to form a bond.
Oh, wow. So we are rendered functionally incapable of seeing red flags.
Basically, yes.
Evolution mathematically requires us to be temporarily oblivious. And reckless, honestly.
Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
By chemically suppressing our judgment and our fear, the brain guarantees that we overlook imperfections just long enough to foster deep trust.
Right. Because without that temporary blissful blindness, the cognitive load of human hypervigilance might have just analyzed our species right into extinction.
Exactly. A species just can't reproduce if it is constantly terrified of intimacy. But returning to your earlier point about the amphetamine-like nature of the attraction phase,
Yeah.
the human nervous system simply cannot sustain that level of physiological arousal indefinitely.
Yeah, you'd have a heart attack.
Right. The allostatic load would cause the body to literally burn out. The system has to stabilize at some point.
Which makes sense. Humans can't survive indefinitely in a state of impaired judgment and amphetamine highs. And that transition out of that volatile dopamine and PEA phase, that brings us to Dr. Fisher's third stage, right? Attachment.
Yes, exactly.
So this phase shifts the chemical profile entirely away from that manic reward seeking, and it starts relying heavily on oxytocin and vasopressin.
Right, the cuddle hormones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The sources bring up this incredible animal model to illustrate this shift, the prairie vole.
Oh, the voles are a classic example.
Right, because only about, 3% of mammalian species are monogamous? And prairie voles are in that rare group. They mate for life.
They do.
But their close genetic cousins, the montane voles, are entirely promiscuous. And the behavioral difference just comes down to a tiny neuroanatomical variation.
It's all about the receptors.
Exactly. Prairie voles just have a high density of receptors for oxytocin and vasopressin right inside their mesolimbic reward centers.
And the mechanism of action for those hormones is really what makes long-term bonding possible.
How so? Like, chemically?
Well, when partners engage in physical affection, intimacy, or even just, shared proximity, oxytocin and vasopressin flood that reward center. But they don't excite the system the way dopamine does.
Okay.
Instead, they increase GABAergic tone, which is a fancy way of saying they send inhibitory signals that physically interfere with and quiet down the chaotic, frantic dopamine pathway.
So they dial back the mania.
Exactly.
And they replace it with this deep, calming sense of security. So the oxytocin literally dampens the mesolimbic hyperarousal, cementing a warm bond.
Right. It is the brain's chemical strategy to ensure partners stick together long enough to raise highly dependent offspring,
Yeah.
rather than just burning out on a perpetual amphetamine high
Yeah.
and leaving.
That is so elegant. We have these incredibly sophisticated natural pathways engineered over millions of years purely for survival and social cohesion.
You do. But unfortunately, the vulnerability in the modern era is that society has engineered countless ways to hijack those exact same pathways.
Without needing another person.
Exactly. We are seeing a massive rise in behavioral or process addictions,
Mm.
things like compulsive digital scrolling, video gaming, gambling.
Yeah.
And these exploit this exact architecture without introducing a single external chemical into the body.
Okay, I actually have to push back on the framing here just a bit.
Sure.
Because, I mean, comparing someone doom scrolling on their smartphone to someone addicted to a hard substance like cocaine, it feels like a massive stretch, doesn't it?
I hear that a lot, yeah.
Because the neurobiology might be similar, sure, but the real-world consequences are worlds apart. One destroys your physical health, empties your bank account, and can literally kill you. The other just, I don't know, ruins your posture and wastes an hour on the toilet.
Right.
Are tech companies really acting like digital pharmacists dealing synthetic dopamine hits, or is that just like alarmist psychology?
That's a fair question. The real-world physical consequences are undeniably different, which is why we must cleanly contrast process addictions with substance use disorders for clarity.
Okay, let's contrast them.
With a substance like cocaine or methamphetamine, you are introducing an external exogenous chemical, and it physically forces dopamine into the synapse or blocks its reuptake.
Right, it's brute forcing the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the scale of that chemical flood is biologically impossible to achieve naturally. So a natural reward, like eating a great meal, might elevate dopamine to maybe 150% of baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Cocaine forces a spike to 300%,
Wow.
and amphetamines can push it to an astounding 1,000% above baseline.
1,000%, that's insane.
It is. Furthermore, that massive neurochemical spike occurs after the drug is ingested.
Oh, whereas with a process addiction like endless scrolling or pulling a slot machine lever, the dopamine spike happens primarily in anticipation of the reward.
Exactly. It's the unpredictable nature of the feed, the variable ratio reinforcement schedule that B.F. Skinner mapped out years ago.
Right, you never know if the next swipe is going to be something funny or just boring.
Right. So the ping of the notification creates a dopamine prediction error. That is what drives the craving, rather than the content itself providing some massive pharmacological hit.
And I'd imagine the withdrawal syndromes are pretty distinct too.
Oh, very. Substance withdrawal is severely physical. I mean, you are removing an external chemical that the body has integrated into its homeostasis.
Right, so you get the shakes.
You get violent shaking, sweating, vomiting, and it can even trigger lethal seizures that require acute hospital management.
It's life or death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But process addiction withdrawal is primarily psychological. It's irritability, anxiety, restlessness. There's no visible physical intoxication, which makes it a lot easier to hide, honestly.
But the neuroplastic rewiring underneath it all, what the constant repetitive triggering of the reward circuit actually does to the brain over time, that is identical.
Yes. The structural changes are fundamentally the same. Whether the stimulus is heroin or a slot machine algorithm, chronic overstimulation downregulates your dopamine receptors.
So they just shut down.
They prune away. The reward system becomes desensitized, meaning everyday pleasures just no longer register. A good meal or a walk in the park feels like nothing.
Wow.
And simultaneously, the prefrontal cortex suffers structural impairment, which degrades the individual's impulse control and their executive function. The actual hardware is rewired to prioritize that specific behavior above all other survival needs.
So you literally lose the ability to say no. And you know, looking at the sources, the ultimate trapdoor into these addictive reward cycles, the thing that flips the switch from just a bad habit to a full-blown compulsive disorder is stress.
Stress is the universal trigger, absolutely.
And to understand that, we have to look at the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Right, the body's primary stress response engine.
Exactly. Can you break down the mechanics of that for us?
Sure. So when a threat is perceived, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called CRH. This signals the pituitary gland to release ACTH, which then travels all the way down to the adrenal glands sitting on your kidneys.
Okay.
And that prompts them to pump cortisol right into your bloodstream.
Right, the stress hormone. And it's interesting because the genius of the HPA axis is its built-in negative feedback loop.
Yes. As cortisol levels rise in the blood, specialized glucocorticoid receptors up in the brain sense that elevation, and they send an inhibitory signal back to the hypothalamus saying, okay, stop releasing CRH.
It functions exactly like a home thermostat.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Like, you set the temperature, and when the house gets too cold, the furnace kicks on. When the house warms up, the thermostat senses the heat and shuts the furnace off.
Right.
So the HPA axis works perfectly, until the system is overwhelmed. When an individual experiences chronic, unrelenting stress or they engage in chronic addictive behaviors, that thermostat basically breaks.
Exactly. The constant flooding of cortisol causes the brain's glucocorticoid receptors to downregulate. They just become desensitized to the noise.
So the brain can no longer accurately read how much cortisol is even in the blood.
Right. So that inhibitory signal is never sent, the furnace never shuts off, the entire stress system becomes severely hyperactive.
Which sounds exhausting. And this breakdown, it triggers a terrifying shift in the mechanics of addiction, doesn't it?
It really does. Because in the early stages, an individual seeks out a substance or a digital behavior for positive reinforcement.
They want to feel good.
Right.
Yeah.
They want the high, the novelty, the pleasure. But once that HPA axis is dysregulated, the motivation completely flips.
Huh.
Well, when they are not engaging in the behavior, they plunge into this profound negative affect, crushing anxiety, dysphoria, and an overactive stress response that makes them feel like they're physically crawling out of their skin.
Oh, wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they transition entirely to negative reinforcement. The behavior is no longer pursued to achieve a high. It's pursued desperately just to escape the agonizing pain of an overwhelmed stress system and an underfunctioning reward circuit.
So they are basically self-medicating to temporarily quiet the HPA axis just to reach a baseline of normal.
Exactly. The pursuit of pleasure morphs into a frantic flight from misery.
That is so dark. But understanding that shift from impulsivity to compulsivity, I mean, it changes everything about how we view addiction. It isn't a moral failing. It's a desperately malfunctioning survival drive. It's a broken thermostat.
Precisely.
So for anyone listening to this deep dive right now, the most critical question is obvious. Once the dopamine receptors are pruned away and the HPA axis is stuck in the on position, how do we physically fix the hardware?
Well, one of the most fascinating clinical approaches detailed in the sources is metaphor therapy.
Right, using narrative structure to rewire the brain.
Yeah. In treatment centers like Asyut University Hospital, therapists are using symbolic reframing rather than direct confrontation.
Why not just confront the behavior directly?
Because when a patient is trapped in addiction, their internal narrative is incredibly rigid. Any direct challenge to their addictive behavior just triggers the amygdala, which results in immediate defensiveness and denial.
Ah, the firewalls go right back up.
Exactly. But metaphor therapy works by sneaking past those neurological defenses.
Like a Trojan horse.
Yes. When you listen to a metaphor or a symbolic story, the brain processes that information through the default mode network. It bypasses the immediate threat detection of the amygdala.
So that allows the prefrontal cortex to safely examine the underlying irrational thoughts without feeling attacked.
Exactly. They form new associative pathways. By changing the narrative they tell themselves, patients are literally recruiting their logic centers to build stronger synaptic connections, which then send inhibitory signals down to calm the amygdala.
It is cognitive restructuring at a biological level. That is incredible. And then for resetting the mesolimbic pathway itself, the dopamine center, Dr. Anna Lemke's clinical research really jumped out at me. She advocates for a strict 30-day abstinence reset.
Yes. If an individual is struggling with a behavioral addiction, complete abstinence for 30 days forces the neuroplasticity to basically reverse direction.
Though the first 2 weeks are usually agonizing, right? Because the brain is operating with a severe dopamine deficit.
It is very tough.
Yeah.
But the mechanism behind the 30 days is that withholding the artificial dopamine flood forces the brain to upregulate.
It physically regrows those receptors.
Exactly. It sensitizes the dopamine receptors that were pruned away during the addiction. So by week 3 or 4, the neurochemistry begins to balance, and natural everyday rewards suddenly feel satisfying again. You are literally regrowing your capacity for normal joy.
That's incredibly hopeful. But supporting that reset requires managing the HPA axis, too,
Yeah.
which is where Dr. Majid Fatuhi's research on brain fitness becomes really essential.
Right, lifestyle changes are a huge part of this.
Yeah, actively cultivating a calm mind through daily mindfulness practices or, rigorous aerobic exercise, even learning new skills. It physically lowers circulating baseline cortisol.
It does, and it improves the structural integrity of the prefrontal cortex, which enhances problem solving and executive function.
So you are basically building thicker neural wiring in the exact areas needed to hit the brakes on impulsive urges.
It's exactly what you're doing. And cognitive behavioral therapy operates on the same principle. It acts as physical therapy for your prefrontal cortex.
Right. It trains the brain to observe a craving from the amygdala without automatically acting on it, which strengthens those inhibitory pathways.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Let's pull all of this together. We began by looking at the incredible amphetamine-like rush of early attraction, witnessing how our neurobiology intentionally suppresses our logic and fear just so we can form a bond.
Right.
And then we saw oxytocin step in to dial down the mania and secure the long haul. We examined how modern digital habits exploit those same survival circuits, mimicking the neuroplastic changes of substance abuse through unpredictable rewards.
Yes, the variable ratio schedules.
And finally, we uncovered how chronic stress breaks our internal thermostat, shifting us into negative reinforcement, but also how 30-day resets and narrative therapy can literally regrow our receptors and rewire our defenses.
Synthesizing this neurobiology really leaves us with a profound philosophical conundrum, though. This raises an important question.
Yeah.
We've established that our brains use the exact same chemical language, the same dopamine, the same cortisol, the same oxytocin, to bond us to a life partner as they do to hook us on a narcotic or a smartphone.
Right.
So if our deepest passions, our romantic bonds, and our darkest compulsions are all mediated by the exact same mechanical circuitry just striving for homeostasis,
Yeah.
how much of what we consider our unique personality or our free will is really just a byproduct of fluctuating receptor densities?
Wow. I mean, that forces a fascinating question about the future of neuroscience, right? Because if we are eventually able to map these pathways, perfectly understanding every variable ratio schedule and every single oxytocin surge, will we one day invent a pill that can instantly cure the agonizing withdrawal of a broken heart?
That's entirely possible.
Or, a synthetic compound that can artificially generate the deep 30-year attachment of a marriage without the actual shared history. And if a pill could seamlessly rewrite those chemical puppet strings, would you take it?
That is the ultimate question.
We hope this deep dive gave you a completely new lens to view the machinery of your own mind. Keep questioning the systems running beneath the surface, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.